When others offend me, when others hurt me, when we disagree, when others sometimes commit terrible acts, terrible evils against God and neighbor, my first move is often to forget their humanity, to forget that they are another human soul, another human person, overcome with that offense, overcome with that disagreement, overcome with that hurt. I treat them as other. This has always been an issue, as we'll see in our first and our second reading today. But particularly today, in every direction we look, we see division. Opponents going at each other, forgetting each other's humanity. I'm guilty of it. We're all guilty of it. Othering those that we disagree with. Othering those who have hurt us, who have offended us. Let's see what insight our readings offer us today. First, our first reading, Elijah's flight to the cave on Mount Horeb, it follows his encounter with the prophets of Baal. You'll remember, Elijah is living in the midst of a corrupt culture. There's an unfaithful king and queen who are unfaithful to God. They're promoting paganism. They've had a whole host of Israel's prophets killed. There is a gathering between Elijah and his opponents, 450 of them, the prophets of Baal. And Elijah says, this is what we're going to do. You call on your God, I'll call on my God. Whoever sets the offering on fire, that is the true God. Well, as the pagans are calling upon their God, Elijah, sitting next to them, mocks them, makes fun of them. Oh, perhaps he's sleeping. Perhaps he took a trip. Perhaps he did this. Perhaps he did that. And that's why he's not setting this offering on fire. After God answers his prayer, Elijah slaughters all 450 of the prophets of Baal, his opponents. Elijah responds to his opponents with the tactics of his opponents. With mockery, with anger, with violence. Back to the mountaintop where we find ourselves today. Elijah, after this, flees to the cave on the mountain, and God shows Elijah what? He shows him that he isn't in the strong and violent wind which rends the mountains and crashes rocks. He's not in the terrible earthquake. He's not in the destructive fire. No. He is in the light, gentle, quiet sound. God is not in the angry. He's not in the loud. He's not in the violent, but in the quiet. Elijah, with his mockery, with his anger, with his violence, he has a lot more in common with the earthquake. He has a lot more in common with the fire. He has a lot more in common with the strong wind than he does with the quiet, gentle sound. In his encounter with his opponents, Elijah forgets their humanity, and he begins to treat them as other. All too often we do the same with those that we disagree with those that hurt us, with those that commit true, terrible evils against God and neighbor. We react against them with mockery, with anger, and with violence, reacting like a violent wind, a strong earthquake, a destructive fire, rather than quiet, gentle sounds. How does God call us to react to our opponents? We need to go no further than our second reading. Our second reading, St. Paul's letter to the Romans, is important to look at the context of that reading. He's writing to the Romans. What's going on in Rome at this time? Well, there is terrible infighting amongst Christians. One group of Christians of Gentile origin, that means they don't come from a Jewish background, and other Christians of a Jewish background. So Gentile Christians, Jewish Christians, and they are fighting amongst one another. Well, in the midst of this, the emperor, Roman Emperor Claudius, he kicks out all the Jews from Rome. So Jews of Israel, Jewish Christians, you're all kicked out, you're troublemakers. And many of the Gentile Christians are just fine with this. Good riddance. This solves our infighting. That's where we find our second reading today. Paul says, no. We cannot see the nation of Israel. We cannot see Jewish Christians as other. We cannot forget their humanity. That's the wrong attitude. What does St. Paul say? He says, I have great anguish. I have great sorrow. I weep over the loss of the souls of Israel. I shed serious tears over Israel. I would sacrifice my very life, St. Paul says, so that Israel could be restored to Christ. Jewish Christians, the nation of Israel in St. Paul's day, are not the other. St. Paul tells the Romans we forget their humanity when we respond to them with mockery, with anger, and with violence. When we act more like violent winds, strong earthquakes, or destructive fires. I end each of my homilies with an imagine section. Imagine, if what we talked about today came true. It's pretty hard to imagine this coming true. When we look around at division. But let's do it. Our God makes possible unimaginable things. So imagine a world where we not only treat our opponents with respect as some kind of minimum threshold, but where we, with St. Paul, also see their full humanity, see their souls, and weep serious tears of love on their behalf. That's what Elijah missed. That's what St. Paul knew. And that's what Christ desires to bring about in our hearts today.